Real stories of werewolves, of dogmen from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
Urban Werewolf Underground. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I don't believe in the dogman. I think that when people see those, they're really looking at werewolves that are trying to pass as natural animals, that's all. See, I do believe in werewolves. I better. I've had to deal with them in person IRL. This story goes back to when I was a young stud doing crime in Detroit. I later did the time, and I've been clean since, but in those days I had never been caught. And I had gotten away with so many things that I started to think I was magical. I mean, I guess I was magical. Until I wasn't. But while I was magical, I worked for this one gang that was headed by a guy we can call B. B used this woman as his muscle, and we can call her Cece. Cece was the single finest black woman I ever saw in my life, and she was always so nice to me that I thought she and I had a thing going on. I was always on the verge of asking her out when something would happen, and I would have to abort. At first, I thought that was how she kept all the men under control, by being nice. But one night, I saw her become her other self when a guy had to be dealt with. Someone started talking back to B, saying disloyal, even threatening things. Cece walked over to him looking as hot as always, but when she got close to him, she changed. She suddenly didn't look so pretty. In fact, she became a real dog. Or a wolf, I guess I should say. She got bigger. She grew fangs. She grew long claws. And she grabbed that guy who was causing trouble by the front of his shirt. She lifted him way up off the ground like he was a sack of potatoes. And this big, tough guy started whimpering like a little girl, crying in a high-pitched voice like he missed his mommy. She threw him into a wall and people scattered out of the way. The guy wet himself and we all laughed as he ran out of the place, tail between his legs. As Cece turned around and walked away from the scene, she came near me and laughed at my expression. I guess I must have been a little surprised, because I remember her reaching over to my chin with her claw and pushing my jaw up to close my mouth. She made some joke about how I was trying to catch flies that the other guys laughed at. I was too much in shock to even realize it was a joke until later on. She started calling me Venus Flytrap after that, which the men shortened to Venus, in order to try to emasculate me. If Cece wanted to call me that, though, I was fine with it, because Cece was one fine woman. Except when she wasn't. A woman, I mean. This beautiful girl was a killer werewolf. She had the strength of 5 men. I kind of assumed the killer part just because of who she worked for, but the werewolf stuff took me completely by surprise. I hadn't heard of the dogman or anything in those days. I just thought werewolves were in the movies. But this woman was smoking hot, so I acted as casual as possible about her being able to change into a creature bigger than me who could easily bite my head off. I acted like that was my type. One time I saw her carry a guy out of the place and hurl him up into the branches of a tree out front. Another time I saw her growl with her teeth inches from a guy's face, then chase him down the block and out of sight. This was a woman after my own heart. When you're a hot-blooded young man as I was in those days, seeing a woman as fiery and powerful as Cece was just a turn-on. You never imagine her turning that power against you. You only imagine that energy joining with yours, being on your side. I saw her do a number on a guy at a gang party, slamming his cranium into the wall 4 or 5 times in a row, then asking him if he'd had enough yet. I don't think he even understood he was being asked a question anymore by that point. To me, she was the ideal potential girlfriend, which tells you a lot about where my head was in those days. I dreamed about her, and I daydreamed about her too. when I was with other women, I wish they could be werewolves like Cece. One time we were all partying and relaxing, and the biggest of the men challenged Cece to a race. They were to race twice around the compound building we were occupying that night. This gang had offices in very secret and obscure locations throughout Michigan and Wisconsin mainly. They were the most like criminal hideouts from the old Batman TV show of any organization I ever worked with. Some of these places had literally been planned out by interior design specialists. I think it was to pay off a debt to our group, but for whatever reason, we had these warehouses that looked like they were TV networks on the inside. It was kind of funny, to me at least. So anyway, this big guy and Cece had both been partying for hours, and they agreed to run a race outside this building in the night. It was October, so it was not very warm out as I recall. Cece wanted to set ground rules for the race, but the guy sneered at her. He said the only ground rules should be that she isn't allowed to run on all fours. She has to stay on two legs like a human being. Cece shrugged and she was like, "Have it your way, bro." So B says ready, set, go, and the two race off around the corner of the building into the darkness out of our sight. Then soon we see Cece, all smiles, finishing her first lap. No sign of the big guy. When Cece makes it around a second time, before the tall guy even finished one lap, everyone was amazed and all the bets got paid off quickly. But in another minute, when the tall racer still hadn't shown up, some of us walked the course looking for him. We found him right around that first turn, lying in the dirt unconscious. We woke him up and he didn't know what had happened. Cece must have brained him as soon as she knew the rest of us couldn't see. The guy started ranting that she had cheated, but had she? He had insisted the only rules were that she had to stay on her hind legs. Unless he could prove she ran on all fours, then she had not cheated. And that was what it was like around Cece. She was the kind of a person you both look up to and admire, as well as want to get to come home with you. She's the only person I ever had both feelings for at once. Cece was a one-of-a-kind, once-in-a-lifetime sort of an individual. Just judging by the lay of the land, I had assumed Cece was head of security for this gang. She behaved that way when I was over there, so what else could she be? Everyone deferred to her, and she seemed to be number 2 under B's number 1. It turned out that the operation was bigger than that, and not every part understood every other part of the organization. Now, it's important that I tell you that during this period I got some offers that seemed too good to be true, and that was because they were. I thought I was taking on some extra work with a rival gang, but really I was being tested for loyalty by my own gang, and I was demonstrating that I was only loyal to the Benjamins. I had no idea the people I was dealing with on the side worked for the same people I was working for up front. I didn't get it, that they were just doing this to judge my character, but I found out eventually. That was actually a good time for me, the period where I was doing extra work but didn't realize yet that I was being tricked. I finally had enough money to live the kind of life I was always hoping to get to live. When you don't always have to wonder about your next meal, you have time to think of other things. I got cockier than usual, and my confidence was at an all-time high. Cece and I continued to get along, and we continued to flirt. I would always be just on the verge of asking her out, when one night, I saw that woman sauntering down the alleyway toward me. Even seeing her from a great distance was always heart-stopping, but this time she locked eyes with mine from the other end of the alley, and she began walking, strutting toward me. I was kind of stunned. So many daydreams and fantasies were finally coming true. My heart beat harder and harder in my chest, and I began to sweat all over. I was never nervous around women in those days, but CC was a step above your average woman. Hell, she was a step above your average human of any gender. I knew she was out of my league, and I told myself it was time to graduate to the majors. It was my turn at bat, and I would only get one pitch. It was showtime, and I was more nervous than I had ever been in my life. It looked like she had been looking for me, and I wondered if she was going to ask me out before I asked her out. This was an exciting moment. Cece came looking for me. I straightened myself up and I tried to look, debonair, when her fine silhouette emerged from the darkness of the alley, though. It wasn't her pretty face I was looking at. It was her werewolf face. Or one of them. She would morph a lot. She grabbed me and she lifted me. Then turned and started heading back how she came. I was being half carried by one arm and half dragged through the dark, filthy, wet alley. I kept trying to ask Cece what was going on. I had envisioned a lot of different things possibly happening between me and that woman. But this was not one of them. My arm was about half wrenched out of its socket, and my legs were all scraped all over. I was a mess, and I begged her to stop saying I was in pain. She did stop. Then she looked at me with no mercy. The next thing I knew, a sharp pain to the back of my head caused a fireworks show to happen in front of my eyes. And that was followed by a painful kind of unconsciousness. Cece had knocked me out so that she didn't have to listen to my whining, and when I came to in some dark room, sitting in a wooden chair, it took me some time to remember what rooms and chairs were, let alone who I was, or who those two strange people making out across from me were either. There was a muscle-bound man making out with a dark-skinned woman behind a desk. Both they and the room were spinning in nauseating ways. But I eventually remembered who I was, and I understood that the woman was Cece. I didn't recognize the man, even after my eyes were able to focus once again. He had so many muscles on top of his muscles that he looked to me like the African-American version of the Hulk. So this was Cece's type. I never stood a chance with her at all. I'm kind of tall and lean, or I was in those days. It was an upsetting moment, but it got worse when I realized I was tied to the chair I was in, and that I was gagged too. Noticing I was awake, Cece whispered something in her man's ear, and he chuckled, then turned to look me over. He did not look impressed. "This the boy that's been hitting on my woman?" he asked. I started to mumble something into my gag by way of an apology, but I found the back of this large man's hand felt unpleasant when traveling across my cheek at a high velocity. I didn't understand how his arm could be long enough to reach from all the way over there to all the way over here. But the painful sensations reverberating through my cranium proved that it had. He knocked me a bit silly all over again. Then he started making cracks about me that Cece laughed out loud at. I remember he was saying that I was a pimple, and if he wanted anything out of me, he would squeeze my head. I stopped trying to say anything at all, believe me. Was I in trouble for hitting on Cece? I didn't know she was with this guy, so that seemed unfair to me. But it turned out that was just a side issue, a reason for this giant man to have some fun. I was actually in trouble for taking that work with what I thought was a rival gang. It proved to them that I was not loyal, and it proved that I was not worthy of working for this group of investors. I was told that I could either disappear and try to live the rest of my life in a different state under some new name, or else we could make it simple and Cece could just spin my neck around and end the story for me in a quick and efficient way. Well, they didn't wait to hear my answer. The two of them transformed into werewolves in front of me, and they got up and came around the desk to see me up close and personal, the ABC way. I tried to get out of my bindings. I prayed to Houdini to help me get free, but it didn't matter. I was tied to that chair and two huge werewolves were approaching me. I cried. I wet myself. I got nauseous into my gag. It was an ugly scene. I remember waking up being dragged through some leaves and sticks in the snow. I looked up and saw Cece looking down at me. She told me that if I could find my way back to civilization from there, I then needed to find a new name and identity. If she heard of me using my real name ever again, she would find me, and that would be the end. She told me that if I ever saw her or her man, I had better run. She made me repeat all that back to her, and then she kicked me back into unconsciousness. I woke up in the snow, freezing, exhausted, and starving, but I had no broken bones and I could stand and walk. It was dark out, but I looked at tree moss and figured out which direction was which that way. I didn't know where I was because I have no knowledge of the stars, but at least I had figured out the cardinal directions. I chose west to walk in, somewhat randomly. I didn't know where I was going to, but if I kept going in one direction, I figured eventually I might find a landmark or a person and understand where I was and where I had walked from. When I found a couple camping around dawn, I called out to them from a distance, asking for directions. They were terrified of me and kept saying they were armed. All I wanted was to know where I was and what direction was a ranger or a hospital. Eventually they helped me out and I was on my way. When I finally got myself admitted to a hospital, I pretended I had amnesia. I had no ID on me and they called me John Doe. I had nothing. No money. No cards. I was grateful that I was rescued, though. I've tried to maintain that gratitude with the kind of work I do since then, but I admit I went back to doing crime under my new name, and I did some hard time. The feds figured out who I was, but I haven't heard from the werewolves since then. I was certain that when I was in stir, that they would send someone in to finish me off, but it never happened. It mostly hasn't been a very fun life, until the past few years when I got lucky and made some good new friends. I wish I could have learned what was truly important in life when I was much younger. I wasted almost half a century being a screw-up. I used to like the people who were meanest, and I used to want to be one of them. It's just not worth it. Better to try to be one of the busy people, or one of the creative people, or one of the helpful people, or one of the kind ones. Better to choose some path that makes you feel better about yourself inside, because you know you're getting a chance to give back and share the best part of yourself with everyone else. Whether you're good at painting in oils or good at caring for the elderly, in either sense you're making the world a little less horrible, and you really start to get it, how horrible the world can be when you get lost inside of the urban werewolf underground. Sabrina Midkiff on the night shift donates to Scary Stories with a nice gift. Please join me in thanking this episode's executive producer Sabrina Midkiff for making this episode possible. Sabrina donated to us using the thanks button located somewhere under each of our YouTube videos. Sometimes you have to look for it a bit, depending what browser or device you're on, but it should be down there somewhere. Thank you, Sabrina. We don't need to tell you how much it's appreciated, especially the way things are right now. If you would also like to join Sabrina Midkiff in helping us stay alive, you know you can also get some perks in return. Here to explain it all is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.